The COVID-19 pandemic has changed our work-life balance for good. Homes became offices and in-person meetings were done away with. But with the worst of the pandemic now behind us, the migration back to the office is in full effect for some industries. Let's unpack the trends unfolding in both residential and commercial spaces, where the last year has been tough for everyone with costs soaring across the board. How has all of this affected the property industry? Let's talk about this further with Andrea Tucker, who's the director of MortgageMe. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Andrea. And maybe let's just start with the trends that you have started to see unfold after the depths of the pandemic into what we had in 2022 and perhaps what we're likely to see in 2023.
Thanks so much for having me. What we have seen over the last 18 to 20 or so months is an increase repeatedly in the interest rates, which has driven some changes in what kinds of properties are being purchased, the value of those properties, and what has added to some of the complexities that we have found in the industry in the more recent 12-month period is the fact that we are seeing the cost of living increase even more dramatically on top of interest rates. And what this has done is change what the property industry currently looks like and who's buying homes and the value of the homes being purchased.
And that is very interesting because what we did see when the pandemic first broke out in 2020 is that the interest rates were at an all-time low, if you will, and we saw a lot of people flocking, or residential people flocking into the market to purchase, whereas now we're starting to see that trend change. For those who still do have mortgages, are you finding that many of them are opting to sell out or are kind of struggling along with the mortgage that they still have, that they would have taken out a little while before the interest rate cycle changed?
So what we have seen occur in the industry is that the types of properties and the value of the properties that are currently considered hot on the market are in the lower income brackets, the lower value brackets. So any properties beneath 3 million rand, we're still seeing a lot of flux in that market. There are a lot of properties for sale and a lot of interested buyers, as well as in the very, very top end, where you can kind of apply that to the trend of semigration, the trend of people moving to semi-urban areas where they've got more space, where there are more parks, where there are more green areas, possibly estates. So that upper, the top end, we're seeing a lot of movement in that section of the market. But everything kind of in between that, everything in between 3 and let's say 10 million rand is where the market is currently struggling. And those are possibly homeowners who purchased slightly out of their affordability bracket because the interest rates were as low as they were in 2020. And now with interest rates having gone up at least 5 times since November last year, as well as the cost of inflation, which has caused the price of your average food basket to increase quite dramatically, we are now seeing that those people are struggling and are looking at making some quick and short-term decisions, which have got quite a dramatic medium and long-term impact on their cash flow. And we are advising people not to make those kinds of short-term changes now, just to impact them in the current challenges that they're dealing with.
Yeah, let's talk about those options. So I would have bought a house 2 years ago and I was paying perhaps 4,000 Rand less than I'm paying currently, and I still want to soldier through that exorbitant repayment that I have. Are there any options for those who want to continue on with their mortgage repayments? Are they able to approach their banks or third-party participants to discuss an alternative repayment amount? What are those options that are available for those who know that they're struggling, but really just want to make the best of the situation as they can?
There are always options for people struggling financially. We don't recommend a rash decision to sell a property right now because there are some quite heavy costs involved with cancelling a bond, having to pay an estate agent to assist with the sale of a property, as well as lawyers' fees, etc., which need to cover the cost of the transfer and the registration, all of that. Those are quite hefty short-term costs that you need to have money set aside to fund that. So we would rather recommend people currently battling with repayments to approach their bank, and do a home loan renegotiation. You can request that your bank reassesses your current financial situation as well as your credit score, and you may find that they are able to reduce the interest rate that you're currently paying. You can also approach another bank to do the same thing. But what we would recommend, even if you do that, at the same time, have a very detailed look at your current financial situation. Have a look at your income sources if you've got more than one. Have a look at where you're currently spending your money and make some cutbacks. If there is something that you can do to reduce the expense burden on yourself and your family, eating out less, taking less flash holidays, possibly moving your kids to other schools, it's recommended to make those kinds of cutbacks on your expenses, or alternatively looking for additional income sources before you make a big decision to sell a property and downscale to something a bit smaller.
Mm-hmm. And while some of us may not be downscaling, Andrea, we are renovating our homes just to adapt to the current times that exist, in that we work from home more than we would have 2 years ago, for example. How does the mortgage space work when it comes to renovations and paying for those? How does a consumer approach that?
So we recommend people doing renovations on their properties over selling and buying something bigger, for example. So you get to stay in the neighborhood that you might enjoy living in, where you have got a decent school district, for example. So the recommendation is always to renovate. If you are looking at adding value to your property, and I can spend 20 minutes talking about what kinds of renovations are more likely to add value to a property in the medium and long term. But you can always approach your bank if you've gotten to the point where you have started paying off some of the capital. In other words, for the first 5 or so years of a home loan, you're generally paying off interest only. But at the point at which you've started to pay off the capital, you can approach your bank and ask for money that can be set aside, and you in effect rebond your property to do those renovations, or spend some time saving for them. If you have purchased a property with the view to renovate it, we always recommend living in the property for a certain length of time, so that you can be very sure about those kinds of renovations that you want to do. Make sure that you are making those decisions with some experience and some history behind you. So saving for renovations is always the first recommendation. If not, you can approach your bank if you have started paying off the capital, and utilize some of that capital that can be used for value-creating renovations.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, Andrea, an overall look at the trends that you are likely to see going forward, but also the areas that you are seeing residents moving towards, and whether those are informed by the level of affordability that currently exists in the market.
This is the question I always wish I could whip out my crystal ball and say with any level of certainty, but I don't have one of those. So we are expecting some more interest rate hikes over the course of this year. We are not expecting inflation to stabilize anytime soon. And that means that there are going to be more South Africans who are finding themselves very close to that affordability line, where they need to start making some sensible decisions around what to do with a home loan installment of a certain amount of money, and what percentage that is in comparison to the rest of their expenses. So again, going back to that, don't make any big rash decisions in 2023 when it comes to selling a big asset like a property. If you're looking at short-term wins, it's always better to relook at your financial situation. If, though, you have gotten to the point where it is sustainable, then it's always a good idea to go and talk to your bank about that before you've missed too many installments. Have that discussion up front with your bank and see if you can come to an agreement, come to an interest rate renegotiation point where you are going to be paying less interest, approach other banks possibly. What we are experiencing over the last 2 years, and we expect that to continue going forward, is the trend of South Africans semigrating to coastal towns, where they're looking for better quality of life, they're looking for fresher air, they might be looking for better schools in better neighborhoods along the Western Cape Coast, along the Eastern Cape Coast. We also are going to expect more South Africans to immigrate, so you might well find that the buyer's market that we are experiencing in the kind of middle to upper value property is going to expand when more of those properties are put on the market, and you don't necessarily have a wealth of potential buyers ready and waiting to buy those properties. So we might well see some more tension in that middle to upper value space. But we are also seeing people still working from home. It might not be 5 days a week like it was in 2020 and 2021, but people are certainly looking for more flexibility in the workspace, and as a result, where they've got some space to set up a home office, somewhere where they can close the door, keep the family at bay. They might also be looking at doing some renovations, as we have discussed, in their existing properties to make that space available to themselves, as well as people just looking generally for more quality of life around what they consider to be their home. And if their home is a green, semi-urban area where they've got parks and areas to cycle and exercise, you might see people moving to those areas more and more as estates go up, and there's an added element of security in those areas that South Africans are certainly looking for. And I have on purpose not touched on the energy crisis and what that means for South Africans, but we can certainly expect more bank offerings that involve home loans where you can get a certain portion of the value of that property set aside to set up a solar electricity system in your property. But we are also expecting people to spend any additional cash that they've got available in their home loan on being able to get their houses off the grid and be less reliant on the municipality for water and electricity and some of those services that we have begun to expect and not necessarily receive.
Very interesting insights there, Andrea. Thank you very much. And I'm sure many people who are looking to get a home loan, knowing that banks have got that offering to allow for alternative power sources to be funded for their homes, are going to be a little bit more eager, especially with the current times that we are in. That is Andrea Tucker, who's the director of MortgageMe, joining us to speak about the current trends that we have seen since the pits of the pandemic, and really just the way in which consumers or residents of residential areas are moving towards.